بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So this is the second day of our I'tikaf program, looking at this small treatise by Ibn Shaykh al-Hazamiyin, The Key to the Saintly Path, or Miftah Tariq al-Awliya. And so we're going to look at the author's introduction on page number 1, and hopefully we'll look at chapter entitled Reality of the Resurrection on page number 3 today. But before we look at the introduction, as promised yesterday, I wanted to highlight the basic meanings of what it is to be min awliya illah, or what it is to be a wali. And so what I want to draw to your attention, and this is taken from one of the greats of the past, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, a mentor of our author and Imam, Ibn Shaykh al-Hazamiyin, Imam Ahmad Ibrahim al-Wasiti. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, he says, it's been mentioned that the wali, so now we're looking at some linguistics here to understand the meaning. The wali has been named such due to muwalatuhu li-ta'at. Muwalat, you recognize this word when it comes to purification, making wudu. Right, so from the integral elements of making wudu is what is called muwalat, and that is succession. That when you make wudu, you have to wash the limbs not only in order, but they have to be done in succession. It has to be done consecutively. So if you wash, for example, one part of the body in wudu, you have to wash the following part right away. You cannot come back 30 minutes later, an hour later, and pick up where you left off. That wudu is not valid. So there's a succession that happens here. And so the wali comes from that word, muwala, a person who continuously is obedient to Allah. From the word muwala. So they're continuously, in succession, obedient to Allah, meaning they follow one righteous deed after the other. They follow one righteous deed after the other. And juxtaposed to the wali is al-adu. And here we could say the adu, of course, is somebody that has enmity or rancor in their heart. They're an enemy of sorts. And this is all based upon a person's proximity to Allah Azza wa Jalla, their proximity to His obedience. Or, on the other end of the spectrum, proximity to sin. So the closer a person is to obedience, the closer they are to achieving the status of wilaya or wali. And the closer they are to sin and transgression of Allah, then they are getting on the border, getting ready to cross into the enemy territory, if you will, into becoming an adu. Okay? And this should also be something that rings a bell when we are praying in Taraweeh, in particular when we get to Witr, and we're making the qunut. There's a section in there, does anyone recognize it? About the wali, man walait, or man adait. Anyone know that part? Do you know what it is? That part of the qunut? Yeah, there's a dua in there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what's been reported from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is to make the supplication in qunut. He says, وَلَا يَذِلُّ مَنْ وَالَيْتْ وَلَا يَعِزُّ مَنْ عَدَيْتْ. وَلَا يَذِلُّ مَنْ وَالَيْتْ means that you can't belittle a person that you have walayt, taken as a wali. And you cannot give honor to a person that you have taken as an enemy. وَلَا يَعِزُّ مَنْ عَدَيْتْ. You can't give izzah to a person that is an enemy of Allah. And the enemy of Allah is who? Who's the enemy of Allah? Iblis. But those that act like Iblis, they are defiantly disobedient, continuously disobedient to Allah. They are from the soldiers, if you will, of the enemy. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes in the Quran, mentions in the Quran numerous occasions about the wali. And in one verse in particular, He highlights what it means in essence to be a wali. He says, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. They are those that believe and are pious. They are those that believe and they are pious. So the wali is one that combines the embodiment of faith. Here, iman is essentially what it is that you believe. And what it is that you believe as a person of faith is the articles of iman. You believe in Allah, you believe in a messenger, you believe in the angels, you believe in the books, you believe in the last day, you believe in the divine decree. You have a certain doctrine that you have adopted and have become attached to it. It's a conviction that you have in your heart. That's fundamental. But then there's also the element of piety. Right? So to be a wali means not only do you believe something, you say, I'm Muslim, I believe in my faith wholeheartedly, but at the same time I act accordingly. I display a level, or I practice a level of religiosity that would define me as a person of piety. Right? Without the action, there's no piety. A person can believe in Islam. They can believe in the truth of the message. They can believe in Allah and the angels and the prophets and the books and the last day and the divine decree, but then they can be very unpious. They can be very sinful. So the wali is the one that comprises of both of these elements, faith as well as piety, and that's important to keep in mind. So what that does for us is with that understanding, it allows us access to that station, to achieving that station of wilayah. And whoever Allah takes as a wali, as mentioned in the qunut, then no one can disparage them. No one can harm them. No one can belittle them. And if they attempt to do so, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will wage war against those that seek to harm His awliya. Allah will protect the awliya. So that's an encouragement for each and every one of us to make strides in that direction. Belief and piety. And here we'll look at the author's introduction, and he begins, of course, in the name of Allah. He says, in the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the custodian of praise and its rightful owner. And may his peace and may his blessings be upon the best of his creation, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, his family and his companions. So this is a typical opening, of course. After that, he says, thereafter may Allah's peace and blessings be upon hearts which have been enlightened with the light of insight, thus becoming like stars, glowing with permission from the bestower of good. So here, this is kind of setting up, and it's going to frame for us the pinnacle of if you will, of piety. The pinnacle of piety. The beginning where he says, peace and blessings be upon qulubin istanarat bi anwar al-irfan. They've been enlightened, if you will, by the light of irfan. This could be like Gnosticism or awareness, ma'rifatullah. They become aware of Allah. And essentially, this one line is referring to an extremely lofty station, which is known as maqam al-mushahada. Mushahada is when the person has achieved a level of awareness and devotion, a level of sincerity based upon knowledge and understanding, that it's as if they witness Allah. It's as if they see Allah. And this maqam, or this station, maqam al-mushahada, is what's highlighted in the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, when he approached the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the form of a man who was wearing white clothes and very dark hair, was unrecognizable by his companions, meaning he was a total stranger. He was very clean, meaning in this context, he didn't just arrive from a long journey, otherwise he would be dusty, he would be dirty. It's as if he came out of nowhere. And this was the angel Jibreel alayhi salam. And he came and he asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about Islam. And the Prophet mentioned the pillars of Islam. He asked him about Iman. And he mentioned the pillars of the articles of faith, which we just talked about. And then he asked him about Ihsan. And Ihsan is the pinnacle here. And within Ihsan, there are two different levels. There's Maqam Muraqabah, which is a level of supervision where you are constantly aware that Allah is supervising and watching. And then higher than that is Maqam Mushahada, which is you are now worshiping Allah as if you see Him. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ, he said about Ihsan. He says, "In ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarah," to worship Allah as if you see Him. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَى, and if you're unable to do that, فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ, then know He sees you. Okay? That doesn't mean that you are going to see Allah in this life. The closest possible thing that's been reported from the Prophet ﷺ is in dreams. Seeing Allah in a dream has been authentically reported from the Prophet ﷺ. Exactly how that is, only Allah knows how that will be, and there is nothing like Allah. We cannot describe Allah in worldly terms, nor can we compare Him to His creation in any form or fashion. However, that has been mentioned, and so there's nothing that we can do except authentic narrations from our beloved Prophet. And if you were to see Allah in your dream, then you would know that it is Allah, because the shaitan cannot trick you in that way. So you're not going to see Allah in this life, but mushahada here means that you see and can easily identify and immediately connect with Allah's signs in the world around you. You're constantly connecting the world around you with Allah as if you are seeing Him. So I'll give you an example of that. When you get paid on Friday, the first thought is not, this is the fruit of my labor. It is, this is the provision of Allah. When you are sharing a very cute and heartfelt moment with your child or a loved family member, and you enjoy that love, then immediately you're not thinking about that very human interaction, but you're seeing Allah's love and Allah's mercy. That this is a gift from Allah, and He's showering His mercy upon me and His love by allowing me to experience love in this world, etc. So imagine if you lived your life, not just fleeting moments, but continuous experience, a condition in which you lived where everything around you, you saw Allah. How do you think your worship would be? How do you think your gratitude would be? How do you think, your level of temptation would be when it comes to sin? If you were getting ready to sin and all you can see is Allah around you, then it's unlikely, or it's less likely, not that it's impossible. We're not saying that to be a wali means you're a sinless angel. No, every person falls into error and makes mistakes. There's no doubt that's the way we're created. But the wali is the one that returns back immediately in repentance. And that's a huge part of worship and devotion. So if you were to constantly live in that condition, then you would probably be less tempted to fall into error, but more encouraged to embark upon piety and righteousness. You would be able to understand the world you live in for what it is. And that's where the Imam picks up. And for further reading, as a little homework assignment, I would ask you to look at the chapter entitled The Light and Nur. This is chapter number 24, verse number 35 in particular. I would like you to look that up and then try and read some commentary for that particular verse. Chapter 24, verse number 35, and this is the verse in which Allah says that He is the light of the heavens and the earth. And the example of His light is like a niche. And then it goes on about the oil in the lantern, it's from the blessed olive tree, etc. Look at that verse, look at the commentary, and see what is being described here. Because it's a parable about the lantern and the niche and the wick and the oil. All of that is a parable for something in particular which has to do with what we're reading. So look that up, and tomorrow, tell me what you found. So he says, the great Imam, after having mentioned enlightened with the light of insight, thus becoming like stars glowing with permission from the bestower of good, free from the material world, right? Now you're becoming less and less inclined towards the material, but more the spiritual and the desires of this world, yearning for closeness to the most gracious and most merciful one, continuously remembering Him, inclining towards Him and His proximity. So basically, a person that, when they achieve this level of piety, to be as a wali, it's when you are satisfied to be in the company of Allah. That's when you're most happy, when you're most at ease. And the complaints that you have about company, being in anyone's company, is the people of this world. It's not as satisfying, it's not as fulfilling as spending moments with Allah. Not the other way around, where prayer is an annoyance, prayer is a difficulty, prayer is a hardship, prayer is a bore, prayer is an exercise, prayer is a challenge to sit there and focus and stand for long times, or to read the Quran. I can't stay focused. It seems like a task. It seems too hard. But I'd rather be hanging out with so-and-so at work, or out on the field, or on the court, or at home, where you'd rather be spending company with, whoever, and are fleeing and running away from the company of Allah. The company of Allah is experienced through righteousness and worship. It's experienced through things like itikaf, when you're alone and there's no one here to chit-chat with. And so, this is not an easy task, of course, but it's something that has to be obtained through struggle and great effort. And so he mentions a number of these things. He says, grasping firmly to piety towards Him, beautifying itself with His illumination, gaining even more certainty and faith in Him, whilst always ever increasing until its settlement in the gardens of paradise, essentially the soul, the heart of the believer. Constantly yearning for paradise, yearning for al-Jannah. And some of the greats of the past said that there's a constant yearning of the faithful for Jannah because that's their initial home, their initial abode is paradise, right? Adam started out in the garden. And that's where we desire to be, back home. It's like when you travel and you have to leave your home. You go, and at some point you want to return. You want to be back in the comfort of your own home and the tranquility of your own domicile. And so now the person of faith is constantly looking to return back to their original abode of paradise, which is a place of peace and tranquility. Just like travel is difficult, it's hard, it can be qit'a min al-adhab, right? It's like a type of punishment, travel is. So is traveling in the dunya. Is living in the world like a stranger or like a traveler, as was described by the Prophet ﷺ, where in this life, in this world, is nothing but a traveler trying to return back home to the abode of everlasting peace and tranquility. He says, if you were to see them, O my friend, you would find a people whose souls, out of extreme longing for Allah Almighty, almost take flight. Their bodies are busy with actions of servitude. and their selves, or their souls, if you will, are patient with the divine decree of the all-powerful. It's interesting to note here the combination of two things. What's happening externally and what's happening internally. Externally, it appears as if the person is constricted because they are busy with acts of servitude. They're busy with acts of humility. And they're restricted and restrained from the delights of the world. So they're not delving into worldly fun, which is often associated with excessiveness and oftentimes leads to sin, if not sinful in its very nature. But internally, their experience is very different from what it looks like outside. Internally, they find happiness. They find bliss to the point that he says it's as if they're like flying, taking flight. It's like ultimate freedom, you know? Being able to fly. It's like ultimate freedom. And if you think about it for a moment, what we are facing right now is a culture in which they're looking to find ultimate freedom through the bodily experience while neglecting the inward. And so they can't achieve it. So you find them pursuing acts of excess, pursuing the delights of the world, whether that, in whatever form or fashion that may be, hoping to find that joy and that freedom when in fact inside they are nothing but servants to their desires, enslaved by the shaitan. They have fallen into his snare and his trap, and so there's no satisfaction. There's only moments of worldly pleasure, which, just like the world, are very fleeting. However, the person that is striving towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constantly in this state of freedom and delight. While outwardly they may feel, or I should say outwardly they may look constricted, dealing with the divine decree of the all-powerful. Basically, whatever test and trial is put their way, then they're patiently bearing that burden. They fast when the people are eating. They stand during the darkness of night while people are sleeping. They are sad when the people are happy. They cry when the people of falsehood and doubts are laughing. So here you can see a kind of concept that needs to be understood and embraced as a Muslim community. And that is, we should not expect to be like everyone else. We cannot set that expectation for ourselves. We have to do what everyone else is doing. Here you see the Imam pointing out that when people are eating, you're fasting right now. When people are sleeping at night, you're praying right now. And Ramadan is a great example of that. And it's not something that's restricted to Ramadan, but it's something that is done throughout the year, intermittently so. And then when people are celebrating joyous occasions, you are saddened, etc., etc. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, He says that if you were to obey most people, if you were to follow most people, then they would divert you from Allah's path. If you were to follow, this is an ayah in the Quran, if you were to follow most people, they will divert you from Allah's path. They follow nothing but conjecture, nothing but assumption. There's no certainty, there's no faith involved. So you can't have it both ways. You can't be a person of faith and then be one of the crowd. Allah hasn't set it up that way. He set it up that the people of faith, they're special, they're unique, they're different, they're min awliya'illah. And the majority of people, they're just out to lunch. Literally, in Ramadan, out to lunch. Because they're hungry. And when I'm hungry, I eat. And when I'm tired, I sleep. And when I want to procreate, I do so. And when I want to express ego, I do that. So this is something that has to truly be embraced, because I feel like a lot of times in our community, even as individuals and families and as a greater community, we feel constantly challenged to assimilate. Some assimilation is required to get along in society, but it can't be to the extreme. There has to be a balance there. We cannot fully assimilate our values and our core beliefs. And then the piety, the level of religiosity that comes along with that. Nothing wrong with standing out in this regard. In fact, it should be seen in the other way, right? We have to be able to control what's normal in our own community and households, what we define as normal. That's important because sin has been normalized. And if we're not careful, we'll end up normalizing it ourselves. And then we'll feel shy and ashamed to be pious. We'll feel embarrassed to pray in public or at work, because not praying has been normalized. Prayer has been made strange, weird, and outdated, extreme, unnecessary. It's like kind of kooky to be a religious person. Yeah. It says they fast when the people are eating. They stand during the darkness of the night, trading their transactions in fear of bankruptcy. This is the transaction of the pious, the transaction with Allah. The transaction with Allah is that they trade some of this world for the hereafter by way of righteousness and acts of obedience, prayer and fasting, reciting the Quran, making dhikr, etc. And they are constantly doing so out of fear of bankruptcy, meaning they fear they're going to lose it all. You fear you're going to lose everything. You're going to lose this life and the next. They're sad when people are happy. They cry when the people of falsehood and doubts are laughing. Their hearts have seen from the majesty of their Lord that which is not visible to the naked eye. Hence their secrets were welcomed by the uppermost illuminator, and therefore have the best preparation for the land of resurrection. And here, talking about, these stages and states or conditions a person would be in, it's not something material, but it's spiritual. And the person that is their innermost secret, which would be their heart, is filled with Allah, then they're constantly in a state of preparedness and readiness for the land of resurrection, which is Ard al-Sahira, he mentions here. So here you can see at the conclusion that it's basically giving glad tidings to the one that is able to achieve this station or this, position of being a wali, one of the awliya of Allah. And that it's a person that's constantly ready, that if death were to come to them at any moment, then they would be ready for death, because they've lived a life of faith and of piety, and they've been able to avoid the pitfalls and the snares of shaitan. And so that's the way of the awliya. And that is what the chapters contain, that we're going to begin looking at in greater detail tomorrow. We'll wrap it up here at 30 minutes. We'll look at some of the most fundamental pathways, or, as he says, tariq, to becoming a wali. Jazakallah khair wa sallallahu alaihi wa sallam.